Look at me. The warrant says 5'4", 190 with a tattoo. I am not that person. Please, just check my ID.
Ma'am, I'm not playing games. You match the name. That's enough. Turn around.
The Saturday morning sun was warm on Aisha Williams's back, a gentle, welcome weight as she knelt in her front garden. The rich, dark soil clung to her gardening gloves as she carefully worked compost around the base of a rose bush, its buds tightly furled but promising a burst of crimson in the weeks to come. This was her sanctuary. The neat, two-bedroom house behind her, the carefully tended lawn, the flower beds overflowing with marigolds and lavender. It was all a testament to her quiet, relentless determination. As a 36-year-old single mother to 2 young boys, moments of peace were a currency she treasured. Her job as an administrative manager at a downtown logistics firm was demanding. The boys were a whirlwind of energy, and life was a constant, juggling act. But here, with her hands in the earth and the scent of blossoms in the air, she felt grounded. She could breathe. A car door slammed shut, the sound sharp and alien in the peaceful suburban quiet. Aisha didn't look up immediately, assuming it was a neighbor, but then a shadow fell over her, long and imposing, blocking the sun. She squinted, raising a gloved hand to shield her eyes. A man stood on the public sidewalk, bordering her lawn. He wore the crisp tan and brown uniform of the Bexar County Sheriff's Department. He was young, maybe early 30s, with a severe haircut and an expression that was entirely devoid of warmth. His hand rested casually on the butt of his holstered sidearm. "Aisha Williams?" he asked. It wasn't a question so much as a confirmation. His voice was flat, carrying an authority that expected no argument. Aisha slowly pulled herself to her feet, brushing dirt from her jeans. A prickle of confusion, not yet alarm, went through her. "Yes." "I'm Aisha Williams. Can I help you, officer?" "I'm Deputy Miller," he stated, his eyes doing a slow, dispassionate sweep of her, from her worn gardening shoes to the stray curl of hair that had escaped her ponytail. He seemed to be comparing the woman before him to an image in his mind, and finding the comparison lacking. "I have a warrant for your arrest." The words hung in the warm air. Nonsensical. Aisha felt a disbelieving laugh bubble in her chest, but it died before it could escape. The deputy's face was a mask of cold seriousness. He wasn't joking. "A warrant? For what? There must be a mistake. Ma'am, the warrant is for felony theft," he said, taking a deliberate step forward. Off the sidewalk and onto her lawn, his polished boots seemed to violate the sanctity of the grass she'd worked so hard to nurture. Another deputy, older and more weathered, had now gotten out of the cruiser and was watching from the street, his arms crossed. "Felony theft?" Aisha's mind raced, searching for any possible explanation, any misunderstanding that could lead to this moment, a bounced check, a credit card mix-up, nothing. She hadn't even had a speeding ticket in over a decade. Her life was a meticulously organized ledger of responsibilities met and bills paid on time. "That's impossible. I think you have the wrong person." Deputy Miller's expression hardened, a subtle tightening around his jaw. It was a look she would come to know well, the look of a man whose authority had been questioned, however politely. "The warrant says Aisha Williams. You just told me that's your name. Are you going to comply, or are we going to have a problem?" The quiet of the morning was gone. Across the street, her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, had paused his lawn mowing, the engine idling as he watched. 2 houses down, Mrs. Gable had appeared on her porch, her morning coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Aisha felt a hot flush of shame and confusion. This wasn't just an administrative error anymore. It was a public spectacle. Her sanctuary was being turned into a crime scene, and she was the designated suspect. She took a steadying breath, her heart starting to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had always taught her boys that if you were honest and respectful, the truth would protect you. She clung to that belief now, even as the shadow of the man in front of her seemed to grow darker. "Officer," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside, "I am telling you, with all due respect, you have made a serious mistake." Miller's hand moved from his sidearm and went to the handcuffs on his belt. The click of the metal releasing from its holder was loud, final. "That's what they all say," he said, his voice dropping, laced with a weary cynicism that dismissed her words before they were even fully spoken. "Turn around, ma'am. Place your hands behind your back." The storm hadn't just been uninvited. It was now breaking right over her head. Aisha remained frozen for a second, her mind struggling to bridge the gap between the scent of her roses and the cold, metallic reality of the handcuffs. This had to be a nightmare, a surreal, waking dream from which she would momentarily jolt awake. But the deputy's unblinking stare was all too real. "Before you do this," she said, holding her hands up in a placating gesture, palms open, "can I please see the warrant? Can you just read me the information on it? Maybe we can clear this up right now." Deputy Miller sighed, a gust of theatrical impatience. It was the sigh of a man burdened by the predictable complaints of the guilty. Still, he reached into a folder he was carrying and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He didn't hand it to her. He held it up, angling it so she could read it from a few feet away. "Happy?" Her eyes scanned the document, hungry for the detail that would prove her innocence, the piece of information that would end this madness. She saw her name at the top, in stark, black capital letters, Aisha Williams. Her stomach lurched. Seeing it in print gave the accusation a terrifying weight, but then her eyes moved to the other fields. Date of birth, July 14th, 1982. "That's not my birthday," Aisha said immediately, a wave of relief washing over her. "My birthday is April 23rd, 1988. That's a 6-year difference." Miller's gaze didn't waver. He glanced down at the paper, then back at her. "Clerical errors happen. It doesn't invalidate the warrant." Okay, Aisha said, her mind seizing on the next detail. Address, 1412 Sycamore Street, Apartment 3, B. "I've never lived on Sycamore Street. I've lived at this address on Meadowlark Lane for 7 years. Before that, I was on the other side of town. You can check my driver's license." "The warrant has this address listed as a possible known location," Miller countered, though his tone suggested he was reaching, "but it's not the primary address." "Officer, this isn't me," she pleaded, her voice gaining a desperate edge. Then she saw the physical description, and her hope surged. Height, 5 feet 4 inches. Weight, approximately 190 pounds. Distinguishing marks. Tattoo of a butterfly on left shoulder. Aisha stood at 5 feet, 9 inches tall. She was slender, and she knew she weighed at least 40 pounds less than the woman described. And she had no tattoos. Not a single one. "Look at me," she said, her voice now firm, imploring him to use his own eyes, his own common sense. "I'm nearly half a foot taller than that. The weight is completely wrong. I don't have a butterfly tattoo on my shoulder. Do you want me to show you?" She made a move to pull at the collar of her t-shirt. "Ma'am, stop right there," Miller commanded, his voice sharp, misinterpreting her desperation as aggression. "I'm not going to play these games. You match the name. That's enough to bring you in and let the detectives sort it out. But you're sorting it out right now," she exclaimed, the injustice of it stealing her breath. "You have evidence in your hands that says I'm not the right person. My driver's license is in my purse. Right inside the door. It has my correct birthday and my address. It has my picture on it. It will take you 30 seconds to verify this. This was the moment. The critical juncture where a simple act of due diligence could prevent a life from being shattered. The second deputy, Evans, who had been leaning against the cruiser, shifted his weight. He looked from Miller to Aisha, a flicker of something, uncertainty, perhaps, in his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then seemed to think better of it, closing it again. His silence was a form of consent. Miller shook his head, his decision already made. His mind was a closed loop of procedure, and in that loop, a matching name on a piece of paper held more power than the living, breathing reality of the woman standing in front of him. To him, her protests were not the logical arguments of an innocent person, but the predictable denials of a criminal. He was following the warrant. That was his job. Questioning the warrant was not. "My kids," Aisha said, her voice cracking as the full reality of being arrested crashed down on her. "My boys are at a friend's house. They're supposed to be home in a few hours. I'm a single mother. There's no one else here for them." The personal details, meant to evoke empathy, had the opposite effect. Miller's face became even more impassive, as if she were trying to use her children as a shield. "You should have thought about that before you committed a crime," he said, his voice devoid of any human feeling. The cruelty of that statement struck Aisha like a physical blow. He wasn't just making a mistake anymore. He was judging her. He had already tried and convicted her on her own front lawn. The name on the paper had become her entire identity, and every other fact, her face, her body, her life, her children, was irrelevant. "I did not commit a crime," Aisha repeated, her voice low and trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "The crime is what you are about to do right now." Deputy Miller's patience, already thin, snapped. "That's enough. I've heard all I need to hear. Turn around. Now." He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. His presence overwhelming. The smell of his leather duty belt and the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic soap filled the air. Aisha knew she had no choice. Resisting, even verbally, was clearly making things worse. Any physical resistance was unthinkable. It would only validate his aggression. With the eyes of her neighbors burning into her back, she slowly turned, a profound sense of helplessness washing over her. She felt like a character in a movie, watching her own life unravel from a distance. She presented her wrists behind her back. The metal of the handcuffs was cold against her skin, a shocking, brutal cold that seemed to seep into her bones. Miller cinched them tight, the teeth of the ratchet clicking with grim finality. The cuff bit into the soft flesh of her wrist, painfully tight. "They're too tight," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're fine." Miller grunted, giving her a firm shove toward the street. "Let's go." The walk from her garden to the cruiser felt a mile long. Each step was a fresh humiliation. The perfectly edged lawn, the cheerful yellow front door, the small bicycle leaning against the porch, every familiar detail of her home now seemed to mock her. This was her world, the world she had built, and he was ripping her out of it as if she were a weed. Deputy Evans, the silent partner, opened the rear door of the patrol car. The back seat was hard, molded plastic, separated from the front by a thick plexiglass divider. It wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for containment. As Miller pushed her head down to guide her into the car, a gesture both routine for him and deeply degrading for her, she saw the faces of her neighbors. Mr. Henderson had turned off his lawnmower completely. Mrs. Gable was now standing at the edge of her own lawn, her hand over her mouth. They weren't looking at her with pity, but with a kind of fearful confusion. They were watching a neighbor, a friend, the mother of the boys their own kids played with, being treated like a dangerous criminal. Their world had been shaken, too. Once inside, the door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud that echoed the closing of a cell door. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. Through the plexiglass, she watched Deputy Miller speak to Evans. Their voices were muffled, but their body language was clear. Miller was in charge, his movements crisp and decisive. Evans gave a short nod, then got into the driver's side. "What about my house?" Aisha asked, her voice sounding small and distant through the divider. "My front door is unlocked. My purse is right there." "We'll secure the residence," Miller said dismissively, getting into the passenger seat without looking at her. It was a lie, and they both knew it. His responsibility for her began and ended with delivering her to the county jail. Her property, her life, was not his concern. As the car pulled away from the curb, Aisha twisted her neck to look out the rear window. She saw her small, perfect house receding into the distance, a symbol of the life she had just been violently ejected from. The roses she had been tending just minutes ago were a blur of color. It felt like an abduction. She was being taken against her will, based on a lie written on a piece of paper by a man who had wrapped himself in the cold logic of protocol. To Deputy Miller, this was just another arrest, another line in a report. He had a name on a warrant, and he now had a person with that name in his car. In his mind, the equation was balanced. The complexities, the contradictions, the blatant evidence that he had the wrong human being, all of it was just noise. He was a hammer, and the warrant had made her a nail. The possibility that the system he served could be so fundamentally, carelessly wrong was a thought he was either unable or unwilling to entertain. His rigid adherence to the rules had become a weapon, and its target was the innocent woman sitting in his back seat, her world crumbling with every rotation of the tires, carrying her further from home. The drive to the Bexar County Adult Detention Center was a silent, surreal blur. Aisha stared out the window at the familiar streets of her city, now rendered alien and hostile. Every passing car seemed to hold accusing eyes. Every storefront she passed was a reminder of a world she was no longer a part of. The handcuffs, cinched painfully tight, were a constant, throbbing reminder of her new reality. Her wrists were already starting to chafe. The skin raw and red, they pulled into a sally port, a secure garage-like entrance to the jail. A heavy steel door rumbled shut behind them, sealing them inside. The world outside was gone. Here, the only light was fluorescent, casting a sickly, greenish-white glare on the concrete walls. The air was cool and smelled of bleach and human despair. Deputy Miller led her out of the car and through a series of electronically locked doors. Each buzz and loud clank of a locking mechanism was another step deeper into the labyrinth. He handed her over to the intake officers at the booking desk as if he were dropping off a package. His part of the process was done. The booking sergeant was a large man with a thick neck and a face that looked like it had been set in a permanent expression of weary indifference decades ago. His name tag read Sergeant Peterson. He took the warrant from Miller without a word and began typing information into a computer terminal with slow, deliberate keystrokes. "There's a mistake," Aisha said, her voice hoarse. "My name is Aisha Williams, but the date of birth and the description on that warrant are for someone else. I tried to explain it to the deputy." "Sergeant." Peterson didn't look up from his screen. "Take off your jewelry. All of it. Put it in the bin." He gestured with his chin toward a small plastic tray on the counter. Please, just listen to me, Aisha begged, her voice rising slightly. My driver's license is in my purse. It will prove I'm not the person you're looking for. Can somebody please just get my purse? Ma'am, we don't retrieve personal items. You'll get your property back when you're released, Peterson said, his tone flat and automated. He had said these words thousands of times. He was a cog in a machine, and his only job was to keep the gears turning. He looked at her for the first time, his eyes tired and devoid of curiosity. Everyone who comes through that door says there's a mistake. Everyone says they're innocent. Now, take off the earrings and the necklace. Aisha fumbled with the clasp of the simple silver chain around her neck, her cuffed hands making the simple task nearly impossible. The necklace had been a gift from her boys last Mother's Day. It felt like she was shedding the last piece of her identity. She dropped it into the plastic bin, where it landed with a soft, pathetic clink. Next came the small silver studs in her ears. Each item felt like a surrender. She was led to a small concrete cubicle where she was told to remove her clothes and put on a standard-issue jail jumpsuit. The material was rough and stiff, a faded, dehumanizing shade of orange. It smelled faintly of industrial detergent and the bodies of the countless women who had worn it before her. Her own clothes, her comfortable jeans and t-shirt, still faintly smelling of soil and sunshine, were folded and placed in a large plastic bag. Her life was being systematically dismantled and stored away. Next came the mugshot. She was positioned against a wall with height markers, a harsh light blinding her. "Face forward," a disembodied voice commanded. A flash went off. "Turn to your right." Another flash. In the photos, her face was a mask of shock and disbelief, her eyes red-rimmed. This image, this false record of her as a criminal, would now exist forever in a database. Then came the fingerprinting. A guard grabbed her hands, his grip impersonal and rough, and rolled each of her fingers onto an ink pad and then onto a card. The black ink stained her skin, a physical mark of her new status. With every step of the process, the photo, the prints, the jumpsuit, her protests grew weaker. She was no longer Aisha Williams, mother, administrator, gardener. She was inmate number 74,329, a collection of data points and procedures. Her identity was being erased and replaced by the one on the faulty warrant. She repeated her story to anyone who would listen: the booking sergeant, the guard who fingerprinted her, the nurse who did a cursory medical check. She explained the different birthday, the wrong address, the wildly inaccurate physical description. The reactions ranged from bored indifference to outright skepticism. They had heard it all before. Her truths were just noise in the loud, relentless machinery of incarceration. "You'll get to see a judge on Monday morning, Sergeant," Peterson told her finally, after all the processing was complete. "You can tell your story to him?" "Monday morning?" Aisha asked, the words catching in her throat. "Today is Saturday. You're going to keep me here all weekend? Based on a warrant that is clearly not for me?" Peterson just shrugged. "That's the system. Ma'am, we don't make the schedule." He stamped a final form and slid it into a folder. For him, her case was closed. He had done his job. He had processed the paperwork. The human cost, the terror of an innocent woman being locked away, was not part of his calculation. He pointed down a long, bleak corridor. "You get one phone call. Make it count." The phone was a heavy, armored steel box bolted to the wall in a small, echoing alcove. The receiver was attached by a thick, metal-coiled cord designed to withstand violence. It felt cold and alien in her hand. One call. The words echoed in her mind. One chance to reach the outside world. One chance to ensure her children were safe before the system swallowed her completely. Her mind raced. Who to call? Her parents lived 3 states away. Calling them would only cause a panic she couldn't manage from inside a jail cell. Her boss? Explaining this situation was impossible. There was only one person who could understand, who could act, who wouldn't question her for a second. Her younger sister, Sarah, with trembling fingers. She punched in the numbers. Her hands were still stained with fingerprint ink. Each beep of the phone dialing was a small lifetime. It rang once, twice, a third time. Aisha's heart hammered against her ribs. Please pick up, Sarah. Please be home. Hello? Sarah's voice was a lifeline, a familiar sound in this hostile, concrete world. Sarah, it's me, Aisha said, the words rushing out in a torrent of whispered panic. It's Aisha. Something terrible has happened. Aisha, what's wrong? You sound awful. Where are you? I'm in jail, Aisha choked out, the shame of the words burning her throat. I've been arrested. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What? That's not possible. What are you talking about? Is this a joke? No. Sarah, listen to me. I don't have much time. Aisha pressed on, acutely aware that a guard was standing just a few feet away, watching her with bored impatience. The police came to the house. They had a warrant for someone named Aisha Williams. But it's not me. The birthday is wrong, the address, the description, everything is wrong. But they wouldn't listen. They just took me. My God. Aisha. Sarah breathed, the shock in her voice turning to outrage. Where are the boys? Are they okay? They're at the Miller's house, Aisha said, relief flooding her that she could at least give this one piece of concrete information. They're supposed to be home by 5. You have to get them. Sarah, you have to pick them up. Please, don't let them come home to an empty house. Don't let them get scared. Of course. Aisha, of course. I'll leave right now. I'll get them, Sarah promised, her voice becoming firm, practical. She was shifting into crisis mode. What do you need? A lawyer? Bail money? Tell me what to do. I don't know, Aisha sobbed, the control she had maintained for hours finally crumbling. They said I won't see a judge until Monday morning. They won't even check my ID, Sarah. They're not listening to me. Monday! They can't do that. That's 2 days away. Sarah's voice was sharp with indignation. I'll call a lawyer. I'll come down there. I'll raise hell. We'll get you out. A recorded voice suddenly broke into the call, cold and robotic. You have 1 minute remaining. Panic seized Aisha. Sarah, they're cutting me off. Just get the boys. Tell them Mommy had a work emergency and that I love them so much. Don't tell them where I am. Please, just protect them from this. I will, Aisha. I promise. I'll get them and I'll start making calls. We're going to fix this. Stay strong, Sarah's voice said, full of a confidence Aisha desperately wanted to feel. I love you. The line went dead. The connection was severed. The robotic voice had been precise. The phone was silent. Aisha stood there for a long moment, holding the dead receiver to her ear. The silence on the other end, a deafening roar. Her one link to her life, to her family, was gone. The guard gestured impatiently. Time's up. Let's go. As he led her away from the phone and toward another set of steel doors, a profound sense of isolation settled over her. She had done the one thing she could do. She had activated her sister, her protector on the outside. But now, she was alone. The path ahead led deeper into the jail, into a weekend of uncertainty and fear. She had placed her faith in her sister's ability to fight the bureaucracy from the outside, but she had no illusions. It was a fortress, and she was trapped on the wrong side of the walls. The guard opened a heavy door revealing a large, open room, A holding cell. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and stale food. Dozens of women in the same orange jumpsuits looked up as she entered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, hostility, and resignation. The steel door slammed shut behind her. The sound was absolute. The holding cell was a world unto itself, governed by an unspoken set of rules and a rhythm of crushing monotony. It was a large L-shaped room with concrete walls, a stained concrete floor, and a series of steel benches bolted to the walls. In the corner, a single, lidless, stainless steel toilet offered no privacy. The air was a stagnant cocktail of body odor, disinfectant, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. The only light came from fluorescent panels high on the ceiling, covered in thick wire mesh. They were never turned off, creating a timeless, perpetual state of day that made sleep a shallow, fleeting escape. Aisha found a small, empty space on a bench along the far wall and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. She tried to make herself as small as possible, to become invisible. The other women were a mix of ages and races, their faces etched with stories of hardship, addiction, and poor choices. Some were loud, arguing over a space on a bench or a perceived slight. Others were quiet, lost in their own private hells. A young woman in the corner was crying softly, her body shaking with silent sobs. An older woman with a hard, weathered face watched Aisha with cold, appraising eyes, as if sizing her up. Time lost all meaning. There were no clocks, no windows to see the sun rise or set. The passage of hours was marked only by the grim routine of the jail. A guard would appear with a cart and slide plastic trays of food through a slot in the door. The meals were bland and lukewarm, a rubbery piece of meat, a scoop of pale vegetables, and a slice of dry bread. Aisha couldn't bring herself to eat. Her stomach was a tight knot of anxiety. She drank the water from a fountain attached to the wall, and the metallic taste reminded her of where she was. Sleep was nearly impossible. The lights were always on, the benches were hard and cold, and the sounds were constant. The crying woman, the occasional shouting match, the rattling of keys and the slamming of doors in the corridor, and the constant, low hum of the building's ventilation system. When Aisha did manage to drift off, her sleep was filled with nightmares. She dreamt of her sons coming home to an empty house, their small faces filled with confusion and fear. She saw Deputy Miller's cold, dismissive eyes, heard his voice telling her she should have thought about her children. She would wake with a start, her heart pounding, the reality of her situation crashing down on her anew. During her waking hours, her mind was a torment of what-ifs. What if Sarah couldn't get the boys? What if her boss found out and she lost her job? What would her neighbors think? Her reputation, so carefully built, felt like it was being systematically destroyed. She was a mother, a professional, a respected member of her community. But in here, she was nothing. Her identity had been stripped away at the door, and all that was left was an inmate number and a false accusation. She replayed the arrest over and over in her mind, dissecting every word, every gesture. She had been polite. She had been rational. She had presented clear, undeniable facts. How could facts not matter? How could a system designed to find the truth be so blind to it? She realized with a chilling certainty that the system wasn't designed to find the truth. It was designed for efficiency. It was a conveyor belt. A warrant was issued. A person was arrested, processed, and held. Questioning the process, stopping the conveyor belt to examine a single case, was an inconvenience the system was not built to handle. Deputy Miller hadn't been an anomaly. He was a product of that system. His refusal to look at her ID wasn't a personal failure as much as it was a feature of his training. Follow the paper. process the body, move on to the next. On Sunday afternoon, a fight broke out between two women over a borrowed tube of toothpaste. It was a sudden, ugly explosion of violence. Guards rushed in, shouting commands. The women were separated and dragged out of the cell. The incident left a tense, ugly silence in its wake. Aisha watched it all with a detached horror. This was the world she had been thrown into, a world of desperation and casual brutality, all because of a clerical error and an officer's willful blindness. By Sunday night, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion had settled over her. Her hope had been worn down to a fragile thread. The initial shock had given way to a gnawing dread. Monday morning seemed a lifetime away. She wondered if Sarah was okay, if her boys were scared. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to conjure the feeling of hugging her children. It was a poor substitute. The steel door of the holding cell, which had seemed like a barrier keeping her in, now felt like a permanent part of her world. It wasn't just a door anymore, it was the physical manifestation of a system that had judged her without evidence, locked her away without cause, and refused to hear her truth. While Aisha was lost in the timeless void of the holding cell, Sarah Williams was waging a furious, desperate war against the monolithic wall of weekend bureaucracy. As soon as she hung up the phone with Aisha, a cold, sharp anger had cut through her shock. She scribbled a quick note for her husband, grabbed her keys, and was out the door in less than a minute. Her first stop was the Miller's house. She plastered a smile on her face, a Herculean effort to shield her nephews from the truth. "Hey, boys," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "Auntie Sarah is here to pick you up. Your mom had a last-minute work thing come up, so you guys get to have a sleepover at my house tonight." The boys, 8-year-old Noah and 6-year-old Leo, cheered. A sleepover with their cousins was a treat. Their innocence was a sharp, painful contrast to the reality of their mother's situation. As Sarah buckled them into their car seats, Noah looked at her with his mother's perceptive eyes. "Is Mommy okay?" "She's just fine, sweetie," Sarah lied, her heart aching. "Just super busy. She sends big, giant hugs." Once the boys were safely at her house, distracted by video games and the chaos of her own children, Sarah's fight began in earnest. Her first call was to the Bexar County Sheriff's Department. She was routed through an automated menu before finally reaching a dispatcher. She explained the situation calmly and clearly, emphasizing the discrepancies on the warrant. "Ma'am, if your sister was arrested on a valid warrant, she'll be held until she can see a judge," the dispatcher recited, her tone bored and dismissive. "But it's not a valid warrant," Sarah insisted, her frustration mounting. "The date of birth is wrong by 6 years. The physical description is for a completely different person. Can't someone just look at her driver's license? Her entire life is being ruined over a typo." "There's nothing I can do, ma'am. The arresting deputy made the determination in the field. She'll have to take it up with the judge on Monday." "Monday? That's unacceptable. She's an innocent woman. You can't just lock someone up for the entire weekend because of a clerical error." "Ma'am, if you'd like to file a complaint, you can call the Internal Affairs Division during business hours on Monday," the dispatcher said, her voice signaling the conversation was over. The line clicked dead. Sarah slammed the phone down, a strangled cry of rage escaping her lips. It was like talking to a brick wall. She spent the next hour frantically searching online for a criminal defense attorney who worked on weekends. Most went to voicemail. She finally got one on the line. A man named Mr. Davies. He listened patiently to her story. "It sounds like a clear case of mistaken identity," he said, his voice sympathetic but weary. "Unfortunately, what the dispatcher told you is likely correct. Once the weekend shift starts, and especially on a felony warrant, They're not going to release anyone without a judge's order. The system just isn't set up for that. They'd rather hold an innocent person for 48 hours than risk releasing a guilty one by mistake. So what can we do? Sarah asked, her hope dwindling. I can file a writ of habeas corpus first thing Monday morning, but honestly, she'll likely be scheduled for her first appearance by then anyway. The best thing you can do right now is be there for her on Monday. And make sure you document everything. Every call you made, who you spoke to, what they said. This is egregious negligence. Hanging up, Sarah felt a crushing sense of impotence. The system wasn't just broken. It was designed to be inflexible. Its gears turned at a predetermined pace, and the fate of individuals caught in them was of no consequence. She decided to go to the jail herself. Maybe a face-to-face appeal would work where a phone call had failed. At the detention center's public entrance, she was met by a thick pane of bulletproof glass and another disinterested officer. She repeated the story again, her voice shaking with emotion. She held up a picture of Aisha on her phone, then a copy of Aisha's driver's license she had managed to find online. Look, this is my sister. This is her real date of birth. The woman you have in there is not the woman on the warrant. The officer behind the glass didn't even glance at her phone. Are you a licensed attorney? No, I'm her sister. Then I can't discuss her case with you. Visiting hours are over for the day. You can come back tomorrow. I don't want to visit her. I want you to let her go, Sarah yelled, her composure finally breaking. She slapped her hand against the thick glass, the sound a dull thud. You are holding an innocent woman. Doesn't that matter to any of you? Ma'am, if you don't lower your voice, I'll have you removed for causing a disturbance, the officer said calmly, his hand moving toward a button on his console. Defeated, Sarah backed away. She had hit the same wall at every turn. It was a fortress of indifference, built to withstand the frantic pleas of family members. She spent the rest of the weekend in a state of suspended agony, trying to create a bubble of normalcy for the children while her mind was consumed with images of Aisha alone in a cell. Every laugh from the children was a reminder of the joy that had been stolen from their mother. Every meal she cooked was a reminder of the inedible food Aisha was being served. On the outside, she was fighting a system, but on the inside, she knew her sister was fighting a much harder battle for her own sanity. Monday morning arrived not with the promise of a new week, but as the final round in a brutal fight. Aisha hadn't slept at all on Sunday night. She had spent the long, fluorescent-lit hours pacing the small confines of the holding cell, her mind a whirlwind of anxiety and a sliver of desperate hope. Today, she would see a judge. Today, someone in a position of authority would have to look at the facts. Shortly after dawn, a guard's voice barked through the cell door. "Williams, you're up!" She was led out of the holding cell, blinking in the slightly different light of the corridor. The 2 days she had spent in the cell felt like an eternity. She was taken to a small room where her orange jumpsuit was exchanged for the clothes she had been arrested in. Putting on her own jeans and t-shirt felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of herself. Though the clothes were wrinkled and carried the faint, unpleasant smell of the jail. She was then placed in a series of chains. A chain around her waist was connected to her handcuffs in front and to a set of leg shackles. The cold, heavy weight of the metal was a final, profound indignity. She shuffled along in a line with other inmates, men and women who would be seeing the judge for arraignment. Their faces were a catalog of human misery, some defiant, some terrified, some numb with resignation. Aisha kept her eyes fixed on the floor. The clinking and scraping of their collective chains the only sound. They were herded into a courtroom. It was not the grand, wood-paneled chamber she had seen on television, but a small, functional room designed for quick, efficient processing. The air was thick with tension. She was directed to sit on a bench with other defendants, waiting for her name to be called. Her sister, Sarah, was not in the small public gallery. Aisha felt a pang of disappointment, but then reminded herself that Sarah's first priority had to be the boys. "All rise," a bailiff intoned. A woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense expression swept into the room and took her place on the bench. Her black robes gave her an immediate, unassailable authority. "The Honorable Judge Maria Flores presiding," the bailiff announced. Judge Flores began working through the docket with a brisk, practiced efficiency. She listened to charges, set bail amounts, and scheduled future court dates. Her voice was firm but not unkind. She looked every defendant in the eye as she spoke to them. Finally, the clerk called out, "Case number 774-B-21, the State versus Aisha Williams." Aisha's heart leaped into her throat. A public defender she had met for all of 30 seconds just minutes before stood beside her as she was led to the defendant's table. "Your Honor," the young lawyer began, "my client is here on a felony theft warrant. We believe there has been a significant case of mistaken identity." Judge Flores picked up the file, her eyes scanning the first page. "Aisha Williams," she read aloud. She looked up at Aisha, then back down at the paperwork. Her brow furrowed slightly. "The warrant lists the defendant's date of birth as July 14th, 1982. She looked at Aisha again, a long, searching look. "Ms. Williams, would you please state your date of birth for the record?" "April 23rd, 1988, Your Honor," Aisha said, her voice clear and steady, though her entire body was trembling. Judge Flores's eyes narrowed. She continued to read, her expression growing tighter with every line she scanned. She read the address on Sycamore Street. She read the physical description: 5'4", 190 pounds, the butterfly tattoo. She then looked up from the paper, over her reading glasses, and stared directly at Aisha, who stood before her nearly 6 feet tall, slender, and with no visible tattoos. A long, heavy silence fell over the courtroom. The judge slowly removed her glasses and placed them on the dais. She looked over at the prosecutor, a young man from the district attorney's office who suddenly seemed very nervous. "Mr. Davies," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "would you care to explain to this court why a woman who is 6 years younger, lives at a different address, is half a foot taller, and 40 pounds lighter than the suspect on this warrant was arrested and held in county jail for the last 48 hours? The prosecutor fumbled with his papers. "Your Honor, the arresting officer, made a field determination based on the matching name." "A field determination?" Judge Flores's voice rose, laced with a cold fury that made everyone in the room sit up straight. "Did the arresting officer neglect to bring his eyes with him on Saturday morning, or his common sense? Did anyone in the entire chain of command, from the arresting deputy to the booking sergeant, bother to conduct the most basic, rudimentary level of due diligence and check this woman's driver's license?" The prosecutor was silent. The public defender wisely said nothing. "I didn't think so," the judge snapped. She turned her attention back to Aisha, and for the first time in 2 days, Aisha saw a flicker of empathy in the eyes of someone in authority. "Ms. Williams, I am profoundly sorry for what you have just endured. This is not just a mistake. This is a colossal failure of this county's law enforcement." She banged her gavel down, the sound cracking through the tense courtroom like a gunshot. "Case dismissed. Ms. Williams, you are free to go. And I want the arresting officers and the booking sergeant's names on my desk within the hour. This is an outrage." The reckoning had begun. The bailiff moved quickly to unlock Aisha's shackles. The heavy chains fell away from her ankles and wrists with a clatter that echoed her sudden freedom. The red, raw marks on her wrists were a stark testament to the ordeal she had just survived. She rubbed them gingerly, the feeling slowly returning to her numb hands. She was free. The words rang in her head, but the feeling hadn't quite caught up. She felt hollowed out, exhausted, and shaky. Her public defender gave her a supportive pat on the arm. "You held up great in there. I've never seen Judge Flores that angry." As she turned to leave the defendant's table, her eyes met the judge's one last time. Judge Flores gave her a small, solemn nod, an acknowledgement of the injustice that had been perpetrated in the name of the law she represented. It was a moment of silent understanding that meant more to Aisha than any spoken apology. She walked out of the courtroom and into the bustling hallway of the courthouse. The noise and movement were overwhelming after the muted confinement of the jail. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and then she saw her. Sarah was rushing toward her, her face a mixture of relief and anguish. "Aisha!" Sarah threw her arms around her, holding her in a fierce, protective hug. "Oh my God, I was so worried. They wouldn't let me in the courtroom until they called your name. I just heard. Are you okay?" Aisha buried her face in her sister's shoulder, the dam of emotion she had held back for 2 days finally breaking. She sobbed deep, shuddering breaths of relief, anger, and exhaustion. "They wouldn't listen," she cried. "Nobody would listen." "I know," Sarah said, her own voice thick with emotion as she stroked her sister's hair. "I know, but it's over now. The judge listened. Let's get you out of here. Let's get you home." Back in the courtroom, Judge Flores was making it clear that for some, it was far from over. She had the assistant district attorney and the sheriff's department liaison, who had been hastily summoned, standing before her bench. "I want a full incident report on my desk by end of day," she commanded, her voice still radiating controlled fury. "I want to know the name of every officer who came into contact with Ms. Williams and failed to notice they had the wrong person. This isn't just a procedural misstep. This is gross negligence. This is a civil rights violation that happened under this county's authority, and it will be answered for." She pointed a finger at the sheriff's liaison. "And you can tell Sheriff Thompson that I expect him to be in my chambers tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to explain to me personally what protocols are going to be put in place to ensure this never, ever happens again." "Am I understood?" "Yes." "Your Honor," the liaison mumbled, his face pale. The judge's wrath was not something to be taken lightly. Her reputation for being tough but fair was legendary, and her anger now was a sign that a significant storm was about to break over the sheriff's department. Meanwhile, Sarah was guiding Aisha through the process of being formally discharged. They had to go back to the detention center, to the same booking area where she had been stripped of her identity, to reclaim her property. The officer behind the counter was not Sergeant Peterson, but a younger woman who slid the plastic bag containing Aisha's clothes and the small bin with her necklace and earrings across the counter without making eye contact. News of the judge's fury had clearly already traveled from the courthouse to the jail. The atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension. Aisha put her necklace back on, the cool metal against her skin a small, comforting anchor to her real life. As she walked out of the detention center and into the bright, morning sunlight, she had to stop and close her eyes. The warmth on her face, the fresh air, the sounds of traffic, it was all so beautifully, wonderfully normal. The ordeal was over. Or so she thought, as they drove away. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening. "Aisha, it's your boss, David." "Oh, God," Aisha breathed. "I was supposed to open the office this morning. I didn't even think." I'll talk to him, Sarah said, putting the phone on speaker. David, it's Sarah, Aisha's sister. I'm with her now. Sarah, thank God. David's voice came through, sounding strained. Is she okay? We heard... Well, someone from HR got an automated notification about an arrest. We've been trying to reach her. She's okay, Sarah said carefully. There was a horrible mistake. A case of mistaken identity. She was wrongly arrested. There was a pause on the other end. I see. Well, Sarah. Look, this is incredibly awkward. Because of the nature of our business, we have a strict policy. An arrest for a felony, especially theft, triggers an immediate suspension pending investigation. I'm so sorry, Aisha, but I had to terminate your employment this morning. The release was not an end. It was just the beginning of dealing with the wreckage. The words hung in the car's interior, heavier and more suffocating than the jail cell had been. Terminate your employment. Aisha felt the air leave her lungs, as if she'd been punched. The fragile sense of relief she had felt just moments before shattered into a million pieces. What? She whispered, her voice barely audible. David, it was a mistake. The judge just threw it out. It was a mistake. I understand, Aisha, and believe me, I am so sorry. David's voice replied, laced with a genuine but powerless sympathy. But it's out of my hands. The policy is automated from corporate. The notification of the arrest, not a conviction, just the arrest, was flagged by our security compliance system because our firm handles sensitive client logistics data. Any employee flagged for a financial crime like felony theft is an immediate red flag. They see it as an unacceptable risk. But I can prove it was wrong, Aisha cried, her voice cracking. I have the court documents. The judge herself called it a colossal failure. And you should absolutely send those to HR, David said, his tone becoming carefully corporate. You can appeal the termination, but I can't make any promises. It's a rigid system. I wanted to be the one to tell you. I'm so sorry. Aisha, I really am. The call ended. Aisha stared blankly at the dashboard, her hands clenched into tight fists in her lap. The freedom she had been granted by Judge Flores felt like a cruel joke. They had taken her liberty, her dignity, and now her livelihood. The very foundation of the life she had painstakingly built for herself and her sons had been ripped out from under her, all because of a name on a piece of paper. Sarah pulled the car over to the side of the road, her own face a mask of disbelief and rage. They can't do that. That has to be illegal. Apparently they can, Aisha said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She was past tears now, entering a cold, terrifying state of shock. Aisha Williams was arrested for felony theft. That's a fact. That's a record that will follow me now. The fact that it wasn't me doesn't seem to matter. The reunion with her sons was a bittersweet agony. The moment she walked through Sarah's front door, Noah and Leo ran to her, wrapping their arms around her legs. Mommy, you're back, Leo shouted, his face beaming. Aisha knelt down and hugged them fiercely, burying her face in their hair, breathing in the sweet and familiar scent of her children. For a moment, holding them, she could almost believe everything was okay. But as she looked over their heads and met her sister's worried gaze, the reality came crashing back. How would she pay the mortgage next month? How would she buy groceries? Her savings would last a month, maybe 2, if she was careful. Finding a new job, a job with the kind of salary and benefits she needed, could take months. And now, she would have to do it with the specter of a wrongful arrest hanging over her head. Every background check would pull up the record. Every application would require her to explain this nightmare, to prove her innocence over and over again. That afternoon, she sat at Sarah's kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. While her sister made calls, Sarah's anger had crystallized into a sharp, focused resolve. "We are not letting them get away with this," she said, her voice steely. "Mr. Davies, the lawyer I spoke to, he said this was egregious negligence. He gave me a referral. The best civil rights attorney in the state. He said, her name is Jessica Ford. I'm calling her right now." Aisha felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in days. Fight. The system had rolled over her, had crushed her without a second thought. But it had made one critical miscalculation. It had underestimated her resilience. It had taken her job, her security, her peace of mind. But in doing so, it had also taken away everything she had left to lose. They had pushed her into a corner, and now she was ready to push back. "Make the call," Aisha said, her voice quiet but firm. "Tell her I want to see her. Tell her they didn't just arrest the wrong person. They arrested the wrong mother." The bitter taste of her newfound freedom was slowly being replaced by the iron taste of resolve. They had wanted to erase her, but they had only succeeded in showing her exactly what she was made of. 2 days later, Aisha sat in the impeccably modern office of Jessica Ford. The space was all clean lines, glass, and steel, with a large window that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a view that spoke of power and success. Jessica Ford herself was the embodiment of that power. In her late 40s, she was dressed in a sharply tailored suit, her demeanor a potent combination of honed intelligence and palpable empathy. She didn't radiate warmth. She radiated competence. Aisha recounted her story for what felt like the 100th time. But this time was different. Jessica Ford wasn't just listening. She was dissecting. She had a legal pad in front of her, and as Aisha spoke, she made sharp, precise notes. She asked questions that were pointed and clinical, probing for details Aisha hadn't even considered important. "What was the second deputy's name? The one who said nothing?" Ford asked. "Evans, I think." "Deputy Evans," Aisha replied. Ford wrote it down. "Failure to intervene, a potential point of leverage." "When Sergeant Peterson refused to check your ID, were there other officers present at the booking desk?" "Yes, at least 2 others. Pattern of willful ignorance. Departmental culture," Ford murmured, more to herself than to Aisha. When Aisha finished, detailing the loss of her job, Jessica Ford leaned back in her chair, her pen tapping silently against the pad. She looked at Aisha, her expression serious, her gaze unwavering. "Ms. Williams," she began, her voice calm and measured, "what happened to you was not just a mistake. It was a cascade of failures, beginning with a deputy who chose laziness over due diligence and ending with a corporate policy that punishes the victim. Every step of the way, someone had the power to stop this, to ask a simple question, to look at a driver's license, and every single one of them failed you." She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the desk. "This isn't just a case about a wrongful arrest. This is a case about a systemic breakdown. It's about a sheriff's department that has fostered a culture where protocol is more important than personhood. What they did to you is a violation of your 4th Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure and your 14th Amendment rights to due process." For the first time since the ordeal began, Aisha felt a surge of validation. Ford wasn't just offering sympathy. She was giving her pain a legal name. She was translating her trauma into a language the system would be forced to understand. "So, what can we do?" Aisha asked, her voice quiet. "We sue," Ford said, the words simple and direct. "We file a federal civil rights lawsuit against Bexar County, against the Sheriff's Department, and against Deputy Miller and Sergeant Peterson as individuals. We will name Deputy Evans for his failure to intervene. We will argue gross negligence, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. A lawsuit? Aisha felt a knot of anxiety. That sounds huge. I don't have any money for a lawyer, Ms. Ford. I just lost my job. Jessica Ford held up a hand. You don't pay me a dime unless we win. I'll take this case on contingency. Because I don't just think we can win, Miss Williams. I think we can make an example out of them. A jury will see you, a hard-working single mother, and they will hear what happened. They will be outraged. Ford's confidence was infectious. It wasn't arrogance. It was the certainty of a master craftswoman who knew her tools and saw the flawed material she had to work with. She saw the clear lines of the case, the undeniable facts, the blatant disregard for basic human dignity. The discovery process will be key, Ford continued, already shifting into strategic planning. We will subpoena everything. Deputy Miller's body camera footage, which I'll bet my license he never reviewed. The jail's security camera footage, the logs from the booking desk. We'll pull the personnel files for every officer involved. I want to see every complaint ever filed against them, whether it was sustained or not. We're not just going to show what they did to you. We're going to show that this is who they are. Aisha listened, mesmerized. Jessica Ford was taking the shapeless, overwhelming pain of the last few days and forging it into a weapon, a precise, powerful weapon of law and fact. The helplessness that had consumed her was beginning to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose. This was no longer just about the money she had lost or the job she needed to replace. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that the names Miller, Evans, and Peterson would be forever linked to the consequences of their callous indifference. Okay, Aisha said, her voice stronger now. Okay, let's do it. A thin, determined smile touched Jessica Ford's lips. Good, she said. Now, let's go get your life back. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was, as Jessica Ford had predicted, a battle. The county's lawyers fought them at every turn, filing motions to quash subpoenas and delay depositions. They tried to bury Ford's team in mountains of irrelevant paperwork, a classic tactic of attrition designed to exhaust the plaintiff's resources and will to fight. But they had severely underestimated Jessica Ford. She and her team of young, hungry associates sifted through the noise with surgical precision. Their focus locked on one thing: the evidence. The first major breakthrough came with the body camera footage from Deputy Miller. The county had been slow to release it, claiming technical difficulties. When Ford's team finally received the file, they watched it in a small, darkened conference room. The footage was even more damning than Aisha had described. It began with Miller's confident stride up Aisha's walkway. It captured his dismissive tone, his refusal to even properly look at the warrant when Aisha pointed out the discrepancies. The camera clearly recorded Aisha's calm, logical protests. It captured her pleas to check her driver's license. Most chillingly, it captured Miller's cold, cruel line. You should have thought about that before you committed a crime. Then the camera angle tilted down as he handcuffed her, and the jury would see the raw, red marks on her wrists up close. The audio was crystal clear. It was a minute-by-minute documentary of a man so secure in his own authority that he had become blind and deaf to the truth right in front of him. This is it, Jessica Ford said, pausing the video. This is the whole case. His own camera proves he had every reason to believe she was the wrong person. And he arrested her anyway. This isn't negligence anymore. This is willful ignorance. This is a deliberate choice. But Ford didn't stop there. Her team dug into the personnel files, and what they found painted a picture not of one bad apple, but of a contaminated orchard. Deputy Miller, though only 32, had a pattern. Over his 6 years on the force, he had 3 prior complaints filed against him for overly aggressive behavior during routine stops. 2 of them involved minority women who claimed he had been dismissive and refused to listen to their explanations. All 3 complaints had been dismissed internally with a simple note. Officer acted within department policy. There was no reprimand, no retraining, no consequences. The department had repeatedly looked the other way. Sergeant Peterson's file was different. He didn't have complaints of aggression. His was a record of quiet, methodical corner-cutting. He had been informally reprimanded twice for clerical errors in booking paperwork that had resulted in inmates being held longer than necessary. In one instance, a man was held for an extra 24 hours because Peterson had entered the wrong bail amount. Again, the discipline was a slap on the wrist. The department tolerated his sloppiness because he processed people quickly. He kept the conveyor belt moving. Deputy Evans, the silent partner, had a spotless record. Not a single commendation, but not a single complaint either. He was a ghost, a man who had clearly learned that the safest way to survive in the department was to keep his head down and his mouth shut. Even when he witnessed an injustice, his inaction was its own form of poison. Ford's team also subpoenaed the department's training materials. They found that while officers were trained extensively on use of force and safety procedures, the training on verifying identity and de-escalating situations based on conflicting information was minimal. The unofficial lesson was clear. An arrest warrant was gospel. The paper was to be trusted more than the person. Armed with the body cam footage and the personnel files, Jessica Ford felt the ground shift firmly in their favor. The county's narrative of a simple, regrettable mistake was crumbling. She was building a new narrative, a story of a broken departmental culture that enabled and protected deputies like Miller, that prioritized speed over accuracy, and that saw the people it was sworn to protect not as citizens, but as potential suspects to be processed. One evening, Ford called Aisha to give her an update. "We have the body camera video, Aisha, and we have his record. We can prove this wasn't the first time he's acted this way." Hearing this, Aisha felt a strange mixture of vindication and sickness. It was horrifying to know that other people had been treated this way, but it was also a powerful confirmation that she wasn't crazy. Her experience wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper disease. "So, what happens next?" Aisha asked. "Next," Jessica Ford said, a steely edge in her voice, "we put Deputy Miller in a room, we put him under oath, and we make him watch his own video." The deposition was held in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. Deputy Brandon Miller walked in flanked by 2 lawyers from the county counsel's office. He was not in uniform, dressed in a polo shirt and slacks. He looked younger, less intimidating, but he carried himself with the same unshakable confidence Aisha remembered from her front lawn. He nodded curtly at Jessica Ford and sat down, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional detachment. He was there to answer questions, follow his lawyer's advice, and get through the day. Aisha was there too, sitting quietly beside Jessica. Her presence was a strategic choice. Ford wanted Miller to look at the woman whose life he had upended while he answered for his actions. The court reporter swore him in, her fingers poised over the stenotype machine. "Please state your name for the record." "Deputy Brandon Miller," Jessica Ford began calmly, her questions establishing the basic facts of the day. Miller's answers were short, clipped, and rehearsed. Yes, he was on duty. Yes, he was assigned the warrant. Yes, he proceeded to the address on Meadowlark Lane. He was a model of calm professionalism. "Deputy Miller?" Ford said, her tone shifting slightly. When you presented the warrant to Ms. Williams, she immediately pointed out several discrepancies. Did she not? She made some claims, yes, Miller said. What were those claims? She claimed the date of birth was incorrect. Miller conceded. And was it incorrect? There was a different date of birth on the warrant than the one she stated was hers. He was using carefully chosen, passive language, coached by his attorneys. She also pointed out that the address on the warrant was for a Sycamore Street apartment, correct? Yes. And the physical description. Deputy, the warrant described a woman who was 5'4" and approximately 190 pounds. Is that correct? That's what the warrant said, Miller confirmed. And the woman you arrested? The woman sitting across from you right now, Ford said, gesturing toward Aisha. Would you describe her as 5'4" and 190 pounds? Miller's eyes flickered toward Aisha for a fraction of a second, his composure momentarily faltering. One of the county lawyers cleared his throat. Objection, relevance. It's highly relevant, counsel. Ford shot back without looking at him. The deputy's own perceptions are at the heart of this case. Please answer the question, Deputy. She did not appear to perfectly match the description, Miller admitted through gritted teeth. Not even close. Would you agree? Ford pressed. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained in my own mind, Ford muttered under her breath. Before moving on, Deputy, Ms. Williams offered to show you her driver's license to clear up the matter, correct? She mentioned her ID. Yes. And what did you do? I followed standard procedure. A matching name on a felony warrant requires an arrest. Verification can be done at the station. But it wasn't. Was it? No one at the station verified her identity against the warrant's details until she was brought before a judge 2 days later. Is that right? Miller shifted in his chair. I am not responsible for the booking process. This was the moment Ford had been waiting for. Let's talk about what you are responsible for. She nodded to an associate, who set up a large monitor on the table. I'm going to play a video for you. Deputy, it's Exhibit A. The footage from your own body camera on the day of the arrest. As the video began to play, the atmosphere in the room changed. The confident deputy on the screen strode up to the house. The audio filled the silent room, Aisha's polite voice, Miller's dismissive tones. He was forced to watch himself ignore her pleas. He was forced to listen to her point out the facts, the birthday, the address, the height. Then, the most damning line played out, his own voice, cold and clear. You should have thought about that before you committed a crime. Aisha flinched, the memory as sharp as if it were happening all over again. Ford paused the video. The room was deathly quiet. She looked at Miller, whose face had lost its color. His mask of professionalism had cracked, revealing a flicker of raw panic. Deputy Miller, Ford said, her voice soft but cutting like a razor. At that moment, when you spoke those words, you had already decided she was guilty, hadn't you? No, I was just... It's a phrase. I was trying to maintain control of the situation. Did you feel the situation was out of control? Was Ms. Williams resisting? Was she threatening you? No, but she was argumentative. She was pointing out facts. Deputy, facts that proved her innocence. Is that what you consider argumentative? Miller didn't answer. He just stared at his own frozen image on the screen. Let's go back to your statement that you were following procedure, Ford continued. Relentless. Please tell me what part of your training instructs you to ignore direct, exculpatory evidence presented at the scene. What part of your department's policy advises you to disregard a 6-year age gap and a 5-inch height difference? Where in your manual does it say to refuse to look at a valid, state-issued ID card when offered? He was trapped. His rehearsed answers were useless against the undeniable reality of his own recorded actions. He looked to his lawyers, but they could offer no help. They stared grimly at their own notepads. The truth is, there is no such policy. Is there, Deputy? Ford concluded, her voice rising with righteous indignation. You didn't arrest Aisha Williams because of policy. You arrested her because it was easier than doing your job. It was easier than admitting you might have the wrong house. It was easier than filling out a report explaining why you didn't execute the warrant. You chose the path of least resistance, and in doing so, you destroyed a woman's life. Isn't that the truth? Deputy Brandon Miller, the man who held all the power on Aisha's front lawn, sat under the fluorescent lights of the conference room, utterly and completely broken by his own words. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence was the only confession Jessica Ford needed. The deposition sent shockwaves through the Bexar County Council's office. Miller's catastrophic performance under oath, combined with the irrefutable body camera footage, transformed Aisha's lawsuit from a nuisance they could manage into a 5-alarm fire. They knew that if that video was ever played in front of a jury, the outcome would be devastating. The image of a calm, polite woman being systematically ignored and arrested by a callous deputy was poison. A week later, Jessica Ford received a call. It was the lead attorney for the county. The arrogant, dismissive tone he had used in earlier interactions was gone, replaced by a strained, businesslike cordiality. Jessica, he began, we've had a chance to review the evidence and the depositions. While the county admits no wrongdoing, we recognize that there were procedural irregularities in Ms. Williams' arrest, in the interest of avoiding a protracted and costly trial for all parties. The county is prepared to make a settlement offer. Jessica listened, her face impassive. She motioned for Aisha, who was in her office for a meeting, to listen in on the speakerphone. I'm listening, Jessica said. We are authorized to offer Ms. Williams $150,000, all-inclusive, to resolve all claims, the lawyer said. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. $150,000 was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It would pay off her mortgage. It would secure her son's future. For a fleeting moment, the sheer relief of it was overwhelming. The nightmare could be over. She could take the money and try to piece her life back together. Jessica Ford, however, was not impressed. She knew exactly what the offer represented. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a calculated business decision. It was the county's attempt to buy their way out of a public relations disaster and a much larger verdict. It was the price they were willing to pay to keep that body camera footage out of a courtroom and away from the evening news. $150,000? Jessica repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. For 2 days of false imprisonment? For the loss of her job and the damage to her reputation? For the trauma inflicted not just on her, but on her children? That's not a settlement offer. That's an insult. Jessica, be reasonable, the county lawyer countered. It's a very generous offer. It's more than she would have made in 3 years at her previous job. The comment was a cold, deliberate reminder of Aisha's financial desperation. It was a gambit designed to make her feel like she couldn't afford to say no. Aisha looked at Jessica, her mind racing. The money was tempting, a lifeline in a sea of debt and uncertainty. But then she thought about Deputy Miller's smirk in the deposition. She thought about Sergeant Peterson's indifference. She thought about the system that had chewed her up and spit her out, and was now trying to sweep its mess under the rug with a check. This was never just about the money. It was about accountability. She shook her head slowly, meeting Jessica's gaze. She gave a single, firm nod. Jessica's voice was ice. My client is not interested in your attempt to buy her silence. Your procedural irregularities have a name. It's called gross negligence. Your deputy's field determination has a name. It's called a civil rights violation. We are no longer interested in negotiating. We have a trial date. We will see you in court. She hung up the phone. The silence in the office was thick. Are you sure, Aisha? Jessica asked gently. A trial is a risk. Juries are unpredictable. That money is guaranteed. I'm sure, Aisha said, a newfound strength in her voice. When I was in that cell, I felt completely powerless. They took everything from me. If I take that money, they get to pretend it was just a simple mistake that can be fixed with a check. They get to keep their secrets. Miller keeps his job, Peterson keeps his, and nothing changes. Someone else will end up in that cell because of them. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. This is not just for me anymore. It's for the next person they pull over, the next person they refuse to listen to. They don't get to bury this. I want a jury to see what they did. I want a public record, a judgment that says what happened was not just irregular. It was wrong. Jessica Ford smiled. It was the smile of a warrior who had just seen her client pick up a sword. Then that, she said, is exactly what we'll give them. The county's desperate gambit had failed. They had mistaken Aisha's need for weakness. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The courtroom was packed. The story of the single mother arrested by mistake had caught the attention of the local media, and reporters filled the back benches. On one side of the courtroom sat Aisha and Jessica Ford's legal team, a small, focused group. On the other side sat a phalanx of county attorneys, surrounding Deputy Miller and Sergeant Peterson, who were both in ill-fitting suits, looking pale and uncomfortable. The trial lasted 3 days. Jessica Ford was masterful. She called a series of witnesses that built an unshakable foundation of fact. Aisha's neighbor, Mr. Henderson, testified about seeing the arrest, describing Aisha as a quiet, model neighbor and her interaction with the police as calm and non-confrontational. Aisha's former boss, David, testified reluctantly about the automated termination policy, confirming that the arrest itself, not a conviction, had cost her the job she loved. Then, Aisha took the stand. In a clear, steady voice, she walked the jury through her ordeal. She didn't cry or raise her voice. She simply told her story. From the moment the shadow fell over her in the garden to the moment the judge's gavel fell. She described the cold of the handcuffs, the smell of the holding cell, the crushing despair of being ignored. Her composure and dignity made her testimony all the more powerful. The jury listened, their faces a mixture of sympathy and growing anger. The county's defense was predictable. They argued that Deputy Miller was a dedicated officer following the procedures for a felony warrant. They claimed that, while the outcome was unfortunate, it was a result of a simple, human error originating with a typo in the warrant database, not malice or negligence on the part of the officers. They tried to paint Aisha's experience as a regrettable but unavoidable consequence of a system trying to keep the public safe. The turning point came on the final day. The plaintiff calls Deputy Brandon Miller to the stand, Jessica announced. Miller walked to the witness stand, avoiding eye contact with Aisha. The county lawyer led him through a series of softball questions, trying to portray him as a diligent officer who made a tough call in a difficult situation. Then, it was Jessica Ford's turn for cross-examination. She approached the witness stand, a remote control in her hand. A large screen was positioned so that everyone in the courtroom, especially the jury, could see it clearly. Deputy Miller, she began, You testified that you acted in accordance with your training. Let's see what that looks like. Shall we? She pressed the button. The body camera footage began to play. The courtroom was silent, captivated. The jury saw what Jessica's team had seen months ago: Aisha's peaceful garden, her polite confusion, her logical, desperate attempts to prove her innocence. They heard her voice, clear as day, pointing out the wrong birthday, the wrong address, the wrong description. And then they heard Miller's voice, dripping with dismissive authority. When the line, "You should have thought about that before you committed a crime," was spoken, a visible ripple went through the jury box. One juror, a middle-aged woman, gasped softly and put her hand to her mouth. Another, a man with a thick mustache, shook his head in slow, disgusted disbelief. Jessica paused the video. "Deputy Miller, the woman on that screen, Ms. Williams, was she a threat to you?" "No," Miller mumbled. "Was she resisting arrest?" "She was questioning my authority. She was providing you with facts, Deputy." Jessica corrected him sharply. "Facts you chose to ignore. Why didn't you just look at her driver's license?" "Why?" Miller stammered. "It's not procedure. It's not procedure to use your own eyes, to use common sense." Jessica's voice filled the courtroom. "The truth is, you had already made up your mind. You saw a name on a paper, and you decided that paper was more real than the person standing in front of you. You didn't see a mother, a neighbor, a citizen. You saw a suspect to be processed. And when she dared to question you, you punished her for it." She let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before turning to the jury. "No further questions?" The footage had transformed the trial. It was no longer about a simple mistake. The jury had seen the truth with their own eyes. They hadn't just heard about Miller's indifference. They had witnessed it. They had become participants in the injustice. The county's lawyers knew it. Miller knew it. The case was over. The only question left was how high the price of their negligence would be in her closing argument. Jessica Ford did not shout or resort to theatrics. She spoke in a calm, deliberate voice, a voice of reason and righteous anger. She walked the jury through the cascade of failures, from Deputy Miller's choice on the lawn to Sergeant Peterson's indifference at the booking desk. "This is not just about money," she told them, her eyes sweeping across each of their faces. "This is about a message. It's about a price. What is the price for 2 days of a person's life? What is the price for a mother's stolen dignity? What is the price for the terror instilled in her children? Bexar County wants you to believe it's a small price, a simple mistake. But your verdict will decide the real price of negligence. Your verdict will send a message that will be heard in every squad room and every booking station in this county. A message that says, you will not be allowed to ignore the truth. You will not be allowed to value procedure over people. You will be held accountable." The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they filed back into the jury box, their faces were grim and determined. The foreperson, the man with the thick mustache, handed the verdict form to the bailiff. The clerk's voice was steady as she read the findings. "On the count of false imprisonment, we the jury find for the plaintiff, Aisha Williams. On the count of gross negligence, we the jury find for the plaintiff, Aisha Williams. On the count of violation of civil rights, we the jury find for the plaintiff, Aisha Williams." The clerk paused, unfolding the final sheet of paper. "We award damages to the plaintiff, Aisha Williams, in the amount of $5,900,000. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The figure was staggering. It was a punishment. It was a statement. Aisha sat stunned, tears finally streaming down her face, not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming, cathartic vindication. Sarah, sitting behind her, squeezed her shoulders, sobbing with relief. Jessica Ford gave Aisha's hand a firm, triumphant squeeze. Across the aisle, the county's lawyers sat frozen, their faces ashen. Deputy Miller stared blankly ahead, his career, his reputation, and his future collapsing around him in that single moment. The verdict was not just a financial blow to the county, it was a permanent, public branding of his failure. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within a week, facing immense public pressure and the certainty of a losing appeal, the county announced it would not contest the verdict. Sheriff Thompson issued a public apology to Aisha Williams. Deputy Brandon Miller was fired for gross misconduct and violations of departmental policy. His law enforcement certification was reviewed by the state and permanently revoked, ensuring he would never wear a badge again. Sergeant Peterson was demoted and reassigned to a desk job, but the damage was done. He opted for an early retirement weeks later, his career ending in quiet disgrace. Deputy Evans, the silent observer, received a formal reprimand for failure to intervene and was ordered to undergo remedial training, a black mark that would follow him for the rest of his career. The Bexar County Sheriff's Department was forced to overhaul its training protocols on identity verification. A new, mandatory Aisha's rule was implemented, requiring officers to verify at least 2 points of identification beyond a name before making an arrest on a warrant where a suspect's identity is questioned. The price of their negligence had resulted in real, tangible change. We are left with the silence that follows a storm. The verdict is read, the cameras flash, and the legal battle ends. But for the people at the center of it, the echoes remain. What drives a man like Deputy Miller? Not to evil, but to a kind of bureaucratic blindness that is just as destructive. It isn't born from a desire to harm, but from a dangerous cocktail of certainty and system think. For 6 years, he was trained that the paper is truth, the warrant is absolute. His job was not to question, but to execute. When his authority was questioned by Aisha, it didn't register as a plea for logic, but as a challenge to his role in that system. In his mind, he was the thin line between order and chaos, and her arguments were a form of chaos. He wasn't just a man, he was a uniform, an instrument of a process, and that process had no room for the messy, inconvenient truth of human error. Could this have been different? If Aisha had a camera of her own, recording from the very first moment? Would Miller's behavior have changed under the glare of a second lens? If her neighbors had done more than just watch, if they had stepped forward, spoken up, and corroborated her identity in that crucial moment, could their collective voices have pierced his armor of procedure? Perhaps. In a world where every interaction can be documented, creating our own record is no longer just a right. It's a form of self-defense. It forces accountability where there is none. The ultimate lesson here is not one of vengeance, but of vigilance. Aisha's victory was not just in the millions of dollars awarded, but in her refusal to be erased. She fought back not just for herself, but for the core principle that a human being is more than a name on a form. Her courage forced a system to look in the mirror and confront the cost of its own indifference. It reminds us that justice is not a given. It is demanded. It is fought for, in courtrooms and in the quiet, resolute dignity of a single person, refusing to be wronged. We want to leave you with a couple of questions to reflect on. What would you have done in Aisha's situation, in those first crucial minutes on her lawn? And more importantly, what can we all do as a community to ensure that when we witness an injustice, we are more than just silent bystanders? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if this story moved you, please share it. These are the conversations that matter.